Well, listeners, we do this episode about the same time every single year. It seems like right after tax planning, we get into an episode giving you an idea of what land has sold for throughout the year. And this is no difference for us in 2022, but we've got more excitement. So a pleasure of mine. I don't even need to introduce co-host David, but Dave, the land expert here in the Midwest, is going to help us put together this episode. Dave, world champion, no. Are you world champion auctioneer?
Not quite yet.
Almost world champion
Yep.
auctioneer. Many state champion.
There you go.
Auctioneer. Selling record amounts of land in your career this year. You obviously been a podcast host for more than 3.5 years. And are you currently the president of the Iowa Auctioneers Association?
Past president of the Iowa Auctioneers Association and now current president of the Realtor Land Institute.
But still tied very, very closely to the data we're going to share
Definitely.
today. But we've also got a guest for you listeners. We know we've picked up a lot of you from out west. So, Dave, who is joining us today?
You bet, Tanner. We wanted to expand. Of course, I geek out on data in the I states where we have a lot of corn and bean crops, but the land market is completely different across the United States. And one of my good friends, Scott Schuman, is with us out of Colorado. And Scott has been a friend of mine and a mentor in the land world. He is one of the lead auctioneers at Hall & Hall Auctions, and he is the author, Tanner, just this last year, if you get a chance, folks, listeners, author of 1,000,000 Acres and Counting, and it's a good read. He's got a lot of experiences of selling over 1,000,000 acres in that book. So let me give a plug there. And he's the past president of the National Auctioneers Association.
That is
Welcome, Scott.
royalty.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
No, this is awesome. I like having new perspective, fresh perspective as we put topics together. 1,000,000 acres sold. I'm curious. So that book must be written based upon the number of acres you and your company have sold, right?
That's correct. Yeah, we. I think I've kept a running total actually, which I'm kind of glad I did since the very first started in the business, and kept kind of a ledger of different auctions, and I would write, which I guess is maybe a little bit of a suggestion for folks that are maybe just getting started in the business. I would write just a few sentences that were meaningful, or maybe a paragraph that was meaningful about that particular auction, and maybe who some of the key people were, right in my little ledger. Who the key people were, who their phone numbers, obviously. So if I'm ever back in that area, I can contact that local banker that I worked with 7 years ago, for instance. And yes, I kept pretty good track of things that were going on, and I don't know, we were up to about 1,000,004 in acreage, and that's about the time when COVID came and shut us all down. And so that's I spent some time putting that together, and it's kind of a neat little piece for people to read. So it was fun.
Yeah, I might have to steal one of Dave's copies to actually read through that, because it sounds like it would be very interesting. One, just to get the perspective on somebody who's done this for an entire career. And for our listeners, Dave gave you a good introduction as to who Scott is. But when you introduce yourself, Scott, how do you go about doing that?
I think Dave did a great job. And in fact, when you introduced him as world champion, you weren't far off there. He's probably missed the world championship by about a quarter of a point couple times, so you weren't far off there at all. But hey, I grew up eastern Colorado, little town called Strasburg, right on Interstate 70 that goes through the country, and grew up on a dryland wheat farm, and raised cattle and hogs and sheep, primarily through the summers, because those were my 4-H projects. I went to college. I started an auction business right out of high school. And then that kind of put me through college. Went to college at CSU and got a degree in agriculture education, thinking, hey, I'm going to be an ag teacher, and I'm going to have my summers off, because at that time, a lot of equipment auctions were taking place in the summer.
Sure.
And I thought, this is just going to be great. I'm going to have students that can line up equipment, and this is just the perfect business plan. And shortly after I graduated there, I went to get my master's degree at Purdue, and finished up there and was offered a job with a national auction firm. And so I didn't go back to teaching. I only taught a year and a half. That's how long I used my degree. So everything else has been kind of hard knocks, I guess. But so I went to work for a company, and they were a company that operated in a couple states, and they said, you can't have these states. Your rest of your territory will be the rest of the country. So, and at that time, of course, we didn't have cell phones, and so I had a desk and a telephone and start making calls and kind of old school way of doing everything. Guess we didn't have computers then either. So I think back about it, thinking, how in the world did that ever happen? But worked really well, and worked for that company for about 15 years. And then in 2010, that company was bought out, and I decided to start another auction company. And actually, the company I'm with, Hall & Hall, was not in the auction business, but they were one of my clients for about 15 years. So a lot of people never really heard of them in the auction world, kind of a boutique firm that would from time to time refer me an auction, and they didn't want their name on it. I'd say, typically in our industry, if you're working with a broker, you would say, I'm going to do Whitaker Auction in cooperation with
right.
Jim Jones, J.C. Jones Real Estate or whatever. And so they didn't want their logo on the brochure. And I said, why is that? And they said, well, we're out here selling against auctions. And so at the time that company was bought out, and I came to Hall & Hall, I said, it's time for you to start an auction firm. And we worked through they said, well, bring us a business plan, show us how this could work. And we worked it out, just a lot of great guys, and didn't know where it was going to go, but that was in 2010. So we're celebrating our 12th year in this role.
Nice.
And, I'm licensed in 30 states, so I tend to travel around a lot. Our company, the company was actually started in 1946. And so we've been around a little over 75 years. And so I'm still kind of the new guy after 12 years. But we've got 19 offices, and we go around the country, and I get calls from different brokers saying, I need you to come look at this property. And
you guys have a financing or lending arm at your group as well, correct?
We do, yeah. We have a management department that manages a little over 2 million acres, and primarily in the ranch world. And then we've got a traditional real estate side, and then our lending side. And so we've got a few different business units and try to be the complete package kind of for a landowner, I guess.
Well, I found you an expert, Tanner.
Yes, you did.
Alongside myself.
Absolutely. So let's jump right into what we're talking about today. And I just want to hit high level. I want 3 words, no more than 5. How has, Scott, land sales in your territory been different than 2021? So what's been the difference of 2022 versus 2021?
Yeah. Well, in my territory is a little bit difficult to describe because we're spread out California to Virginia. And so I'm going in about 30 different states. But, 21 ended it was so strong. In fact, it was almost embarrassingly strong in that a person could have just gotten into the real estate industry and their phone's going to ring.
Sure.
And it didn't take a whole lot of work to get things done, and things were selling at a very strong pace, a lot of inventory, a lot of people saying hey, the markets, this is the time to sell, that kind of thing. So extremely strong 21, which carried over into 22. 22's been strong. And as you know, with land sales, they've been absolutely crazy in 22. There hasn't been a big difference. 21, we actually sold more real estate in 21 than 22 on total acres. But dollar volumes, records keep getting broken and prices keep getting up.
Right.
That's a lot more than 3 to 5 words. But
that's right. It's a podcast that works just fine. So Dave, in your area.
Yeah.
What are you seeing? Do you echo the same, or what would you synopsis?
Wholeheartedly. What we saw is third quarter of 2021, land shot up kind of in the Midwest about 29%. Okay. So wow, that third and fourth quarter really took off. So fourth quarter 2021 was one of the largest jumps that I've ever seen in my career. Then we wondered if it was going to hold. Would it hold? And we have. We've stayed steady despite rising interest rates, despite a changing market. More acres have hit the market. I think this year versus last year, we sold Iowa, a little bit of analytics for you, about 140,000 acres last year. This year, we're already at 132,000. So I got another month to put in there. We're right on pace to sell about the same.
Right.
And the land market is trended upward, not 29%, but just up, at a 2% trend upward, though.
Okay. Well, good. So that'll give us a high level, but I want to go back in time a little bit before we get deeper into this episode, because last year when we did this, we were coming out of COVID, and we really didn't know the full effects of COVID. So, Scott, I want from you, how do you feel COVID has changed the land sale market or the game or whatever terminology you want to use? How did COVID change the way we do things?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people, of course, obviously all of us know during COVID, we probably all know somebody that we've lost a dear friend or loved one or what have you. And I think, in my opinion, in 2020 really caused a lot of people to step back and really analyze themselves, analyze their lives, analyze their investments. You saw a lot of people that, hey, we've been living in the city and working this great job, and for what? And, maybe it's time that we start building on something. And those folks started looking at alternative investments and looking into, and then waking up and saying, holy cow, the land market's a great place to be. And how come we never knew about this as an investment? It's been kind of a little bit of a hidden investment, but, obviously the local farmers and operators all have known that for years and years and years that it's a great investment. The big funds and family offices, wealth offices, that kind of thing. The big funds, that's where they've been. If you bought insurance over the last 40 years, a portion of that insurance money, they invested in farmland because they knew it was a great, solid investment. And I think 2020 just kick-started a lot of that. And, I was looking at some data. Our database has grown by 20,000 people since 2020. And I think it's because a lot of people were back at home saying and analyzing things and say, what are we going to do?
Right.
Now, at the same time, 2020 caused a lot of supply chain issues, obviously, and we've not gotten over those. And so input costs, corn, fertilizer, all of that has just gone out the roof. And then we've been hit with, just a lot of different things. There's a lot of loss in confidence of our government since 2020. A lot of division in the country since 2020. A lot of people wonder, a lot of skepticism, I should say.
Right.
At the same time, we've been hit with the drought in 60% of the country, and the main travel line that nobody seems to talk about, Mississippi River, is at its lowest point ever. They can't get barges, and 60% of our corn goes down the river, and our fertilizer comes back up, and we can't move that. When you can't move those commodities that you actually need, those prices are going to remain high.
Yeah.
So
I actually saw, as we record this, listeners, about 2 weeks ahead of time, we're here on the 2nd of December. I actually saw that the North's already froze out. For how low the level is in the river, it's already froze out. Not enough water moving to keep it from freezing. So it's working its way south, Dave. But what did you see now that we have another year behind us as to how COVID affected the way you do your job?
Well, I'm going to echo what Scott said in that I think everybody rethought their position. And so that brought new people to the market. And one major shift, and it's not just in farmland, it has been remote working. And so COVID forced us to stay home. So everybody had an internet connection. Everybody started working remotely. And a lot of businesses realized that, hey, we don't need you to come in the office. And so I don't know if that was a shift in the commercial world, but at least in the job market it was. So then people thought, well, hey, could I move to Colorado? Could I move to Montana? Could I move here? And can we do the same blooming thing and get it done at the same time? So the one difference between maybe what Scott's selling, what I'm selling a little bit is, Tanner, as you well know, in Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, etc., we're very production agriculture where it's all based on a rate of return. If you want a fancy house in Bozeman, Montana, you're not so much concerned about a rate of return
Right.
as you are. So the buyers that I have, I got new people to the market as well. But they were the ones that were, as Scott said, transitioning their investments maybe and say, you know what? Hey, here's a hidden gem. Hey, rate of return on this might be less, but it is solid, solid, solid. Hey, this carbon credit thing might be big. We should probably invest in that. Hey, wait a minute. Long-term returns, USDA say, is actually just as good, if not better than the stock market. And have you ever seen farmland not rented out? The vacancy rate is like 0.
Right.
So, hey, instead of now we lost all our vacancy because nobody wants to work from their office, maybe we transition to farmland. So I've seen new people join that market prior to interest rates going up. New people join that market, and that's kind of what's changed. How we sell it, of course, you've seen, I don't know the number, Scott might, but I'm going to say, I'm going to throw it out there that at least 80% of auctions across the United States are done online.
That's a lot higher number than I was expecting.
Yep.
Well, you just had one this week that sold to a buyer online.
In Oregon. Yep.
Yep. Is that the same thing you're seeing, Scott?
Well, yeah, I would say the only difference, I would say you're probably right. 80% of some that have an online component.
Yep.
Because and that number may be low. That has an online component. I don't think online only auctions would be up to that kind of number, but.
No, I like that.
For clarification.
So Dave hit on one of the pain points of my career right now, and that's rising interest rates and the number of discussions we get to have with those that are on variable rate interest notes, and those that are looking at, hopefully took advantage of refinancing when rates were low to get some long-term fixed places in spot. But for example, Dave's buyer this week isn't going to have access to that cheap interest that we had a year ago. How are you seeing rates affect your sales, Scott?
Very, very little. We're kind of blessed, I guess, because of those earlier issues I mentioned. We're blessed to have very high commodity rates. And if you're looking at $8 corn, I think it's going to have to get down to $5 corn before we start seeing a change. And I think there's so much cash out there in the market, tons of cash in the market. That the interest rates really I haven't seen them affect our business at all. You're still seeing record prices being set all the time. And it's interesting, jump back to our earlier question that you asked on 2021, we were all seeing records and saying, holy smokes, these records, we've never seen land bring this much money. Well, those same numbers look pretty darn low this year. And, if that same property would have been sold in 2022, it would have broke another record. And so I think we see a cycle that will dip back down, but every time it dips down, it goes up higher than it was before. And so I don't see that as a long-term concern. Right now there's a lot of there's alternative investments. I think people are probably looking at it saying, hey, I get a treasury bill for 4.65% today. And so should I keep farming at 2%? But, if you're just looking at straight return without appreciation, but if, you kept figuring that appreciation rate, and historically our rates, our farmland prices are really not extremely high based on our rents and based on our commodities. They are historically following the same trend line. In fact, 19% of the time over the last 40 years, we've had a greater raise, a larger raise in farm prices than we did in 2022, believe it or not. And
wow.
So 2022, we haven't been at that price level, but as far as the difference between where it was and what it raised to, it's raised 19% of the time. It's done better than it actually did in 22.
It's more appreciation.
Yeah.
I just Googled the U.S. net farm income, Tanner, and it's super positive. Looking back to 2019 and 18, we're at like $125 billion in their graph here, and this year we're at $187 billion.
Yeah.
There is cash, as Scott was saying, out there, and that is pushing the market higher and higher. I've said it before a million times, 82% of farms in Iowa are paid for free and clear. There's just equity. And now that we're saying all these farms are not worth $5,000 an acre, they're worth $15,000 an acre. Look at the amount of equity on the balance sheet for you as a banker.
Right, and I will get back to that comment. I'm glad you brought that up on the lending side of things. I had seen the USDA's report that came out yesterday, and net farm income's up almost 14% this year over last, and last was one of the highest areas. Now, that is different amongst a lot of categories. That's the average. When you dive deeper into that report, Scott, those that farmed corn, soybeans, cattle, and poultry saw some of the highest levels, and they will caveat that poultry is due to some of the government subsidies because of the avian influenza that we've had. But if you had cotton hogs, and now I'm going off memory, cotton hogs, wheat, there's a couple of crops that didn't fare as well in 2022. So it really kind of divides the nation up a little bit, Dave.
And I might go off track here a little bit, but this is one thing we do on the Realtor Land Institute calls. Scott, I'll do this just because you take such a wide swath, and we have listeners from all over. Who are your buyers? We're talking about farmers. So me and Tanner are talking about net farm income, but maybe net farm income has nothing to do with who your buyers are. If we go northwest, let's go up to Oregon and Washington and up that way. Do you have, if we go around the world, can you give us like a picture map of who your buyers are? Northwest, southwest, central I know is farmers, but then go farther east. Are they all farmers?
No, absolutely not. Funds are huge. Funds are chasing ground, as you know, everywhere. And one reason they've got a ton of money. I've mentioned if you purchase insurance, but if you've got a 401k, a lot of those 401k funds are managed the same way. They're putting part of your money maybe in stock and part of it in commercial office buildings and part of it in farmland. Mm-hmm. And also another thing that's happened through jumping back to the 2020, we've now got that ability to where people can buy a share of farmland, just like you would buy a share of stock. And so, these funds are getting very flush with cash, and they're looking for properties anywhere. Now, the catch with that is they have to have certain parameters because they're investing other people's money. So they've got to hit certain numbers or else they're going to lose their investors, right? So they're looking at that bottom line return number, whereas the neighboring landowner, hey, they've been driving past that farm their entire life and pulling out of their driveway and seeing the farm across the road from them saying, man, if I ever had a chance, I'd buy that. Grandpa had a shot to buy it and he never did. He should have. And I've watched my neighbor get rich off that piece of property. If I ever get a chance, I'm going to buy it. And those farmers have the cash all nationwide. And so, we're seeing probably 75% of buyers are within a 50-mile radius of a property. They're the local people that have that money. But there's a lot of forces driving them from outside that area to drive those prices up. One thing that's kind of interesting, though, and I was thinking about this to ask you, Dave, when I say 75%, and it's 75 to 80%, depending on what part of the country you're in, local buyers purchasing. But I've always had in my mind, hey, it's some guy that's 80 years old and he's ready to retire and he's selling it, and the buyer is a 35-year-old guy that is hot after getting farmland, and I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing it's a 74-year-old person selling it. He's selling to a 72-year-old person in a lot of scenarios. And so, am I right on that, or maybe I'm way off? Or what are you seeing? A lot of younger people getting involved?
Well, not as many, because it takes, Tanner, as you well know, a lot of money to make this happen. And some of those younger people, 35, 40, they want to. Believe me, that is my number one demographic that wants to get into the market. But the cash flow is not there. The equity is not there behind it. And so they're all frustrated coming out of college or coming into, just early parenthood, etc. They don't have the money to make it happen. So then we have family ties. You have to have family ties to be in that demographic. Otherwise, I see a lot, maybe 50-year-olds, 50 to 70s that are buying the farmland that have 2 or 3. They've retired. They have some equity, and now they're like, hey, let's go a different route here. Let's do this farmland game. And a lot of them come. Well, Tanner, you saw it the other day. A lot of them come to the auction. They just want to watch. They're doing the data. They're doing the research. They want to know because they are now have a new chart to chase, and it's farmland.
Okay, listeners, I'm going to apologize. I don't do this very often, but I'm going to hit about 6 things that I've written down since you guys started chatting, because you're saying a lot of awesome things. And I just want to chime in on a couple of things. So, yes, I would say looking at my customers' balance sheets, there's more cash now than they've historically had. And I want to say one of the reasons is they're looking to upgrade machinery and can't get it.
Yeah.
And they're learning that they can run machinery at extended hours or longer than they had to because they were forced to. But then they now have the cash available that they never used to stockpile, which they understand that forces buying power to go higher, and they can actually afford to farm. A lot of farmers didn't used to hold enough cash to go in and buy these farms, which leads to the next comment about David made about balance sheets improving. That's great, but in the lending profession, we're still capping dollars per acre that we will borrow. So just because you have land worth $15 million on your balance sheet or $15,000 an acre on your balance sheet doesn't mean it gives you the power to borrow more money now than it did last year, because banks are being ultra conservative right now, and in some areas capping that debt per acre at $6,000 or $4,500. You're dependent upon the quality there. You mentioned that there's bidders outside of a 50-mile radius coming in and helping drive these prices up. Dave, you've always said that. It takes two bidders. And if you got three, that's how we're getting to a bunch of these higher prices. And then the last thing I want to comment on before we move on is I've been seeing in my customer base and the people that have reached out to me a generational switch. You mentioned, is it the 80-year-old selling to the 72? Is it 74 selling to 72? What I'm seeing is those farmers that are 50 and 60 that were never given the chance until they were 45 or 50 to even make a farming decision are now supporting their children when they show an interest in agriculture and are willing to help pledge collateral, willing to help maybe with some higher cash rent or subsidized equipment costs, because they're the ones that never got the opportunity to buy when they were 30 or 40 and are going to support the next generation because their parents didn't give them that opportunity. You mentioned Grandpa passed up on the farm across the road. I'm not seeing this happen in masses, but I'm seeing it happen more now than it did, to where we see generational connection where maybe that 80 and 60-year-old gap was a disconnection about the future of ag, Dave.
One of the things why I'm thinking that I see 50 to 70-year-olds is a lot of those maybe start thinking about retirement. Okay. And as they think about retirement, they might have just inherited as the second generation. So as the Korean War veterans are passing, and they pass the farm to the baby boomers right now, the baby boomers are looking at this and maybe been a generation removed from the farm tanner. And they were a doctor, an attorney, or something. Okay. And they were over here, and then they realized, wow, this is an annuity. This 160 acres that Grandpa had, I'm making $40,000, and I'm not doing a whole lot of nothing to do it. It's always rented out. I get paid once a year, minimal risk. And they're like, wow, this maybe
zero vacancy
is a better investment than maybe Dad was right, and I didn't even know it. Maybe I should buy more of this farmland. We have some money. Well, we could throw it over here, but I could just do this and then pass that generational wealth.
Well, you go back to Scott's comment about what COVID kind of did and the way politics are sitting is a majority of the population has distrust in our government.
Yeah.
And what is the opinion of farmers or landowners is that I don't want to put my money in the stock market. I don't want to put my money in an investment that could be manipulated by the government. And land, that's hard to do, right, Scott?
Yeah, without question. Yeah, without question. And I think, and there's other questions that are coming up, like, and you would know this better than I, but I think a lot of people are saying, well, is the capital gains, what's going to happen with capital gains? Is that going away? Or do I just go ahead and sell and don't do a 1031 exchange? Just go ahead and sell and bite the bullet.
Right.
And there's that plays right into trust of the government of, hey, they said our Medicare will be there forever. They said our Social Security will be there forever. And you've got people questioning that now, saying, oh, no,
right,
maybe that's not going to happen. And same thing with capital gains.
That might have been one of the factors that pushed the land market in 2021 to rise as much as it did. I know I had lots of customers say, well, I just don't know what this 1031 deal is going to do, because the current administration was saying, we're going to get rid of it. We're going to get rid of stepped up basis. We're not going to be able to transfer wealth. But I talked with David Brown with IPE 1031 yesterday, and he said, you realize that 1031 is one of the largest wealth creators in avenues or vehicles in the world.
Right. Yeah, that's hard to, as a politician, make completely go away without a lot of people lobbying against you. But, Scott, you brought up a good point that I think leads into our next question is, who are you seeing being this group of sellers? Is it people that are just 1031 and into another asset, or what are you seeing as your group of sellers?
No, I really think it's the same as buyers. You're really seeing the same type. You're seeing some people that just change a life. You're seeing, a lot of estates where now, Dave had a great point with people look at the property as an annuity. There's other people that inherit farms and say, gee, I don't even know what to do or how to manage it, or let's sell it. And right now, they're reading about the record land prices, so they're saying let's put it on the market and sell it and cash in to something that they understand. And so, I think there's a lot of different factors there, but we're also seeing a lot of. I said same as buyers. One of the buyers that I didn't mention is we are having a lot of very non-traditional, at least in my market, to where there are people that have worked on Wall Street their entire career. They've not seen grass. They've only seen concrete for 40 years or 30 years. And now they're saying, now, wait a second, explain to me how the farm works. I find it myself in my position frequently almost teaching Ag 101. They maybe they've seen the movie Yellowstone and now they want to be a rancher, but they don't know the difference between a bull and a heifer,
Right.
And so those kind of issues come up pretty frequently, and we're seeing a lot of new people entering that space that had never even thought about agriculture before.
One of our past guests, Pastor Ashley, Pashley, when she was on there, her husband called me the other day. They're a non-traditional, and he talked about doing Ag 101. He said, so what do I need? How do I farm? Mm-hmm. How much does it take for the equipment? How much does it take to buy this? What's it look like? I think we want to get into farmland. It's just what Scott just said. I found myself giving a 45-minute Land 101 class and Farming 101 class just to a potential new buyer.
Yeah, they just need to come listen to the Farm4Profit podcast as a baseline.
Right.
And then they can do the nitty-gritty. So what are you seeing around here, Dave? Who's selling farms?
Scott hit it perfectly. So my number one seller is a family of 4 that inherited the ground. They've seen it somewhere that land prices were up. They started doing some research. Typically, there's one kid that of the 4 siblings that was probably the smartest and most wealthiest too. Go hand in hand. They're normally the decision maker, and they're normally the one that doesn't want to sell it because they don't need the money. Mm-hmm. Then I have other kids that are like, man, I'd really like to pay my house off. Well, I want to sell it. Well, as you know, we can do a partition action if they have more than 25% and say, hey, brother or sister, I want to sell. Well, if that brother and sister doesn't want to buy, they kind of force their hand to go to auction, force their hand to sell that property and try to liquidate that asset to capitalize on the market. So the kids of estates is the answer of who is deciding to sell. The reason is they get stepped up basis. Nobody wants to pay the government taxes. So if you're a local farmer, you're like, oh, I'd like to retire and cash out. You're probably better to keep the blooming ground and take the annuity than you are to sell it and wait to pass away and then give it to your kids, and then they can get stepped up basis. Scott, you had something there.
Yeah, no, and I think you hit it on the head, nail on the head as well. But and this may be a question for me later, but I think when you talk about the family selling in that situation, the auction is the only way that you're going to prove to the entire family that that was the fair market value.
Transparency.
It was on an open platform where anybody and everybody could bid on it. In some of those situations, you may even allow a family member to bid on it if that's disclosed. And that's the only way that you're going to show that transparency to the entire family that's selling. Versus if you listed the property traditionally, put a price on it, it might sell within hours. And then you have half the family saying, well, hey, brother, that they put in charge of this, you sold it way, way too low.
Yep.
Right.
or
And
what have you.
It helps if I have the exact same statement for all of my sellers. It helps fiduciarily. If you are the person who was enabled to be the executor for that estate, you have a fiduciary responsibility to the rest of the estate to make sure that you're transparent, that it brought the most money, that you did the most successful outcome for the brother that still wants to farm it and wants to buy it, but also the other two siblings over here that want to make sure that the brother paid fair market value, not to take advantage of it, but make sure that we got there. Auction method marketing. But Tanner, back to your question. It's estates. Now, I have had some 1031 people moving, selling one asset, going to another asset, but most of mine is when they get stepped up basis and selling for the estate. Some are cashing out and just moving their money. But let me echo this. People do what they know. So when the kids are third generation removed from the farm, they don't know, is $3 corn good or $7 corn good? They don't know. Well, how many bushels are in an acre? Well, what should I be charging for cash rent? I tell you what, Tanner, let's just sell it because I'm going to put it over here in a stock market where I'm making 5% and I know what I'm doing over here.
Right. I'm going to trade Apple stock. I'm going to trade the things that I...
So people will do what they know. The people that are getting in are people that know agriculture. I've had people try to swap from commercial building to agriculture, and they're like, I don't understand this farming, but they understand cap rates on commercial buildings, so they stay with what they know.
Right. Okay, so I've been hearing that we know land is selling. We know land is selling well. Land has been a good investment. Mm-hmm. It looks like it's going to be a good investment in the future. But there's always a subcategory, whether it's equipment, whether it's in banking. There's always something that's not doing well. To your guys' knowledge, what is not selling well right now? If I own it, I should not sell right now. It would be dumb.
Boy, that's a great question. I think you would have to have a lot of different. There's so many different variables for you could own a piece of property and in central Iowa. I think it's good. The price on that's just going to go up. Actually, I'm very bullish on it. And so, should you sell it or should you not?
Well, that's fair.
It's going to come down to an individual question. But they're. Right now, I mean, you've got so many different sectors that are chasing properties. They want to own something. They want to, that stock certificate. They've really never understood it. Right. I'm a stockholder in a major corporation, but I really don't know what that means other than they send me a statement. Versus, hey, I can go out and actually walk on something I own, and it's costing me the same price of what that stock certificate was.
So what about like drought land?
It's not going to go away when the market crashes.
Yeah, you mentioned drought early. So is drought land like Texas, Oklahoma, is it still a strong land market? We know water's coming back or not?
It's still strong. Yeah. And, the farmers, it's kind of interesting. If it hadn't rained for a while, the farmers I deal with think it's never going to rain again and forever. But yet then they get 2 inches and they go out and buy a new pickup. You mentioned earlier that wheat being one of the commodities that was troubled in the last year, and that's really the reason was because of the drought.
Right.
Because they didn't have enough crop to sell. The prices were certainly high enough. Wheat prices are high enough, but if you don't have any wheat to sell, what difference does it make what the price is? You know. And so that's where you're seeing wheat. Now, I was hoping I could answer you somewhat intelligently on cotton and I don't remember the other crop you threw out, but. I really didn't know, but certainly wheat. That's the issue there,
right?
And you can see where the bands of rain have came through, like eastern Colorado. If it's a band of rain, an area there where it rained and they got a good wheat crop, those properties are selling sky high, and that's helping some of those properties that didn't get rain. That may be just 30 miles away. Those same type soils, same types wheat properties are all of a sudden selling for record numbers. Because those farmers see what's happening to their neighbors.
Scott, we just sold a farm in Kansas that is all irrigated land. So in Iowa, of course, we rely on rain. Okay, there's not a whole lot of irrigated land. As we go farther towards Colorado, Nebraska, Kansas, Texas, etc., we see those crop circles all over the place. And how much is the water worth versus versus the land itself, because some that we just sold in Kansas, they were worried that the water table that they had, they didn't know that they were going to get enough pressure. I heard all the farmers talking that they don't think the water table's there anymore, and the people upstream from them are taking the water, and so they weren't given the value. They were devaluing land. Are you seeing that across the country? I mean, how important is that water?
Yeah, very important. You know, where you're at, you're probably looking at a farm and comparing CSRs.
Yeah.
For the most part, and out here we're looking at, especially when you look at a pivot, and when you say the circles, all the flyover states, they call them. When you fly over it, some of them look like Pac-Man, and some of them look like a perfect circle.
Right.
And I've sat with people on the airplane. They say, "What is that? You know, is that a video game or whatever?" But and that's what it is. You've got the well, or the center pivot, they call it, where the water comes up right from the center of that 160 acre square or
Yep.
half mile square. And then it's just a big wiper sprinkler. So when you're looking at a piece like that, you're going to have to look at the equipment as part of it. How old is the equipment? How much water is there? The soils. So there's more things to analyze and to figure out now. So out there, you're doing tile, trying to get water off of your fields, and we're trying to get water onto ours.
Yeah,
right.
It's a difference of a 12-inch rainfall and a 44-inch rainfall or whatever you're getting out there.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, so extremely valuable. Now, when you start talking about water, and out here, you'd mentioned carbon credits, but out here, you've also got wind rights and the mineral rights. If the person owns, or because there's a lot of drilling that takes place. And so there's several things to analyze from that standpoint. But when you talk about water, there's several different types of water too. And you kind of just threw two of them together, one pumping out of a river or owning river rights. The other one's maybe pumping directly out of, say, out of an aquifer, and a lot of people just think that, a lot of people picture that as being an underground lake that has just a ton of straws sticking down into it. I always envision it as more of an underground sponge, where there's some pockets and holes, and there's some places that are very deep, and so the depth of the well and the amount of water that you're able to pump out of that well certainly plays a part into that. Then there's the other type of water, which we've done a couple water auctions where we just offered shares of water.
Wow.
And those would be primarily from runoff off of the Rocky Mountains.
Huh.
And so that water comes down off the Rocky Mountains, and somebody owns it. Somebody's going to own it. So you can buy a share of that water as well.
Wow.
And that's primarily either for building use or municipalities. So we're seeing a lot of municipalities being the bidders. The city actually goes out and runs ads in their paper saying that we're getting ready to spend $4 million of city money and come to have a series of meetings before they get approved to be a bidder. So if I get a call and somebody says, I've got a bunch of water, can you sell it? And we want to sell it next month. Well, I tell them right then, no, you don't want to sell it next month. Oh yeah, the market's hot. I know the market's hot, but your buyers need time to qualify themselves. Because your buyers are primarily going to be, if you did it next month, you're not going to have any of the municipalities participate.
And you want them.
That leads me into another question, Scott. So we've got listeners here that are seeing these record land sales. Every headline is about a record land sale. What are the sellers doing to achieve that? Is it just the characteristics of the ground, or are they doing things to their asset to make it sell for a record?
From our standpoint, which is another thing I kind of talk about in the book you mentioned, but the perfect seller for me, and maybe different for Dave, but for me is one that really trusts the process, whether it's going to be a private listing type process, which we sell a lot of properties through private listing as well, but whether it be private listing or the auction process. And the thing that's the challenge is the seller, when they finally decide to sell, which is a huge, big decision for that seller in most cases. But when they finally decide to sell it, I mean, they have one shot at it, and they want to set the record. They want to do the best they can. And so there's some sellers that want to take control of the process, but they're one shot. That's the only property they've ever sold. versus somebody like Dave and I that are selling properties. That's what we do every day, every week.
Yeah, 100 million
study
acres.
The market study.
Yep.
Yeah, and trying to get involved with, that's what we go to bed thinking about. How can we set that next record, and what do we need to do? And so sometimes you'll have a seller that is demanding you to do something that doesn't work because it didn't work several times for you, perhaps. And so you've learned by trial and error, and you kind of know what's going to work and what's not going to work. So
yeah. We had a conversation the other day, Tanner.
Yeah. So what are these landowners that are making records in Iowa doing, or they just got good ground?
They live in the right spot. Geospatially, they live in the right spot. I have farms that bring $4,000 last week. I had farms that brought $28,000 last week. What is the difference? Location, even on farmland. And so we get pockets of variability of who the neighbors are. Since we're in production agriculture country, okay, since we know that probably 90% of the buyers and bidders are going to come within 50 miles, it's who lives in your 50 miles. Mm-hmm. Do we have aggressive competition, and does more than one person want it? The reason auctions work is because competition. Competitive bidding at its best is the auction method of marketing until the unchallenged bidder becomes the buyer. We need challengers. Mm-hmm. So if your market, your 50-mile spread has challengers, you set record prices. Now, with that, some of the record prices that happen in Iowa had manure rights with it. If I need or I'm forced to buy more land to get my manure rights, I might need that. If I need or I'm forced to make sure I can execute my 1031 in the 45-day window, I need that. So those things are driving that land price higher because they have a very short window to get it done, and you have it's supply and demand. There's not a lot of supply for what they need, but you have.
So right now, these record high land sales, just from my observation here, is not so much something the landowner has done prior to selling it. It's working with the professional that understands the process, to knowing their geography as to who's in their area and make sure it gets marketed to the right buyers.
Yep.
Probably throw some tile into it if it needed it, but ultimately, if you got a good farm and you're in a good spot and you're working with a good seller, you're going to hit those records.
Now, different than equipment, Tanner. We've had this conversation with Machinery Pete. Equipment, yes, it's tell the story.
Right.
It's tell the story about the farm. Tell the story about the equipment. Make sure you clean that equipment. Make sure you shed that equipment. You go out west of Montana, I don't see anybody with machine sheds. But in Iowa, everybody has machine sheds. They store every piece of equipment. They wax it. They make it look like $1 million. Yep. But when they go to sell it, they get the depreciable value, but they also have an asset that they were able to keep on the positive.
Right. So let's flip this.
Hey, when you don't get rain, you don't get rust.
Well, you're right there, I guess. I never thought about that.
It's a good point, Scott. So now let's flip this, because we got a lot of listeners that want to buy land.
Yeah.
What's your best advice, Scott, to someone that wants to buy? How do you most effectively go about identifying and purchasing land without having to compete to top dollar?
Well, I think the best time to buy is when it's available. Mm-hmm. And because a lot of these properties, when they come up, they're not going to be available again. You're going to need to make a decision. You're going to need to have a good rapport with your lender, and I would suggest that. I would say have a very good rapport with your local auctioneer or local real estate broker, mm-hmm. or whoever you choose to represent you, because those people have done it day after day. It's no different than if you wanted to buy stock in a major company. Are you just going to jump online, and you can set up your own account easily and buy stock in any company, for very, very simply on several different platforms? Or do you call a CPA and say, what do you think of this? And that CPA is probably studying it every day, and that's what they're thinking about when they go to sleep at night, or a financial advisor, I should say. That's what they're thinking about day in and day out. And that would be a better choice for you if you're looking at it as a long term. And that's probably the only disadvantage with farmland. It's more of a long term investment. It's not you don't buy it today and flip it tomorrow. But over I think over the last 20 years, I think numbers like 11.9% return. Mm-hmm. So if you can buy it, hold on to it. We are seeing records today, but they're all going to be broken. They're not Nolan Ryan's 7-game no-hitter record. They will be broken. And 2 years from now, we may look back at some of these prices saying we should have been a buyer.
Right.
And
So-
I don't see prices going backwards. We don't see. I went to buy a new truck. When you buy that new truck, are we ever? I hesitated. I said I'm just going to wait till they come back to $30,000. And I said, what did I just say? Trucks are not going back to $30,000. Neither is farmland. It's not going back to $1,000 an acre. We won't see it regress that much.
Right.
But
Yeah, we have a bigger population. We have more people to feed and less ground to do it on.
So what is your advice to a buyer besides just attending an auction? We all know we can go to an auction and buy.
prepare for what you're going to do, what your plan is. So plan ahead. So if you don't, what's the adage? If you don't plan to fail, you're planning to fail. If you don't fail to plan, you plan to fail. It takes a lot of money to buy farmland. So have a plan in place how you're going to pay for it. Have a plan in place of what the interest rates look like, and what even if you work with FSA office, Farm Service Agency, they have a plan of what it looks like. Can it be done? So be realistic. Don't think that you're a 25-year-old out of college going to go buy $2.7 million worth of farmland and farm it with your 40/20 tractor and make it work. So have a plan. That's first thing. The second thing that I would say is, I talked about being realistic as well. But the other thing that I would say is, oh man, drawing a blank of what I just was thinking.
Well, while you think about that, I agree with the plan, because a lot of times, like Scott, to connect to both of your answers, you got to buy when it's for sale. And if you haven't planned to put yourself in a position in which you can buy that farm, then you're not going to be ready, and it's probably going to go to auction. But if you get that one chance and you've already prepared for it, you can say yes.
Got it, Tanner. I just remembered relationships. Relationships are everything. So in the agriculture world, it's getting to be more corporate America, and it's business, but farming is still relationships. So I put a TikTok out there a while ago. When do you ask the family to buy the farm after somebody passes?
Yes.
Okay. I put a TikTok out there, and it was across the board. At the funeral, before the funeral, 10 days after. But the common thread was, you should have already had a relationship with that guy. Remember I said a plan? You should have already had a relationship that I want to expand my farm. I would like to buy that. Now, the odd scenario happens. I had a seller call me this week. We're going to sell a farm. Okay. Seller called me. She lives in Colorado. She was appalled that the tenant called them at Thanksgiving and asked them if they were going to sell the farm. And she specifically told me, my goal is to not sell it to that tenant. I will not accept a bid from that tenant. So it goes both ways. You got to know the person you're working with. Right. How do you know? You built a relationship.
Yeah.
Relationship, just like he was talking, relationship with your banker, relationship with your auctioneer friend, your real estate broker, whoever your trusted advisor is. I'd say relationship is probably the number one key to start when you're buying farmland.
It just made me think. Dave made me think of a funny story. I met with this lady. She had 46,000 acres of farmland that her husband had left her. All pretty good, nice farmland. And she was interviewing auction companies. But we went in, and the day I met her, she said she told me the story about at her husband's funeral. She was in the waiting line, and an auctioneer came over and said, "Hey, can I visit with you?" She said, "Sure." And he pulled her out of the line, and he said, "Your husband always told me that if he was ever going to sell this farm, he was going to hire me to do this." And she said, "Oh, that sounds exactly like something he would say." She said, "I understand that." She said, "The problem is he doesn't own any farmland anymore."
Yep.
Absolutely. Well, guys, we're approaching about an hour into this podcast, so I want to ask one more question.
Okay.
And then I'll summarize. And then you guys stick around, listeners, if you want to hear my post-show rant. We're going to do an after-show rant I want to get your guys' opinion on before I let you go. So first of all, what's your prediction for 2023? Where are we going? What are we going to see, Scott?
Well, you touched on it earlier. I think land or equipment prices are just going to go crazy. I think we're not seeing any slowdown in that. I think the land prices are going to remain strong as long as we keep the commodity prices up and interest rates about where they're at. I think we're still going to see some new records down the road throughout this year. I think we'll probably see a lot of people start getting skeptical when they don't know if the market's rising or if it's stagnant. They tend to not say let's just hold on, let's press pause for a minute, and let's don't let's don't charge on and get it sold today. Let's see what's going to happen in 6 months. And I think we're going to have a lot of those folks out there that are just kind of on the fence. And when they're on the fence, it's like for Dave and I both. When the market's hot, our business is strong, and when the market's really slow, our business is strong. But it's when they're real stagnant and don't know whether they should buy or sell. And I think we're going to see a period of that this year, probably quarter three, maybe part of quarter four. We're going to see some of that to where markets are just a little bit stagnant. Right now, there's not a lot of inventory out there. Believe it or not, even though you're seeing auctions all over, especially in the Midwest. But if you look nationwide, most brokerages are way down on inventory. What they did, and a lot of them that do have a lot of inventory, they've just gone in and convinced a potential seller, maybe somebody that doesn't even want to sell, hey, let's put a ultra high price tag on your property and see what happens. And so you're seeing a little bit of that, and that plays right in to get somebody that knows what they're talking about and that studies the markets before you jump in and buy, just so you're making a good decision.
So, Dave, what about around your area?
So, to give you an answer, I got to give you the thought behind it.
Yeah.
Here's the thought behind it. Positive drivers today: commodity prices and 2022 net farm income. Okay, positive drivers driving the farmland market. What are the negative drivers? Negative drivers are interest rates, 2023 inputs, margin comparison to where you could put your money, and increased volume of farms offered to the market. Okay, so those are the positive and negative that make me give this answer. Now let's hit on interest rates. Interest rates, in my opinion, you're the banker, but here's my prediction. It's going to go up. We're going to go up. I think they're already talking that they're going to raise the prime rate and that we might see even 7.5%, 8%. And then we have the elections coming up. So let's go politics to this. As politics come in, nobody wants a poor whatever economy, poor farm economy. It's going to stay strong. Flat out, it's going to stay strong because we can ride through 8% interest rates, and then that interest rate's going to drop. I think it's going to drop back to that 4.5%, 5% level. And when it does, we're going to have just as much margin, and that eliminates that negative factor of margin comparison. So once we eliminate that, so we're going to maybe see it stay steady. We're going to plateau for another 10 months. 10 months after that, interest rates are going to drop. You're going to hear a lot of election scuttlebutt, and I think people are going to keep investing in farmland, and it's going to be positive. So I'm very bullish for 2023.
Nice. Well, good perspective. So, Scott, I'm going to do my best to kind of summarize what we chatted about today. Just to stall, so you have the most time to think about the question we ask every one of our guests. So we ask every one of our guests what the best advice you've ever been given is. Dave's already given his answer, so he gets a cop-out here. You get to challenge after I finish with my summarization. So we talked land today. We had two great experts on the podcast with us, a new friend and an old friend for you to get perspective from. Ultimately, 2021 was strong, but we thought 2022 was stronger as far as that goes. Maybe we sold more land in 21 acres-wise, but we're seeing records broken now. It doesn't seem to matter where the land's at, what the quality of the land is. In its category, it seems to be doing well. COVID definitely had an effect on the land market, whether that was implementing online applications to where you could buy and bid at an auction online, or it was a change in perspective as you wanted to move out of the city, wanted your own little piece of the ranch, and continue to look at where you wanted to invest your money for your life. Overall, we feel like it is stronger in the past. We know that cash on hand for farmers is higher than historically, maybe because of high commodity prices, the rise of net farm income, lack of machinery available to purchase. But ultimately, we are still looking at a market to where when a farm sells is your opportunity to buy. Most of your sellers have been generational switches. We've got stepped up basis, a lot of families that can't come to a consensus on retained ownership are selling. A little bit of 1031 exchange involved there as well, which then moves our buyers into a mix. A large majority, I think Scott said, still over 75% of the buyers are local farmers within 50 miles of the asset that is selling. But we're also bringing in those that are 1031 exchange investors. We're bringing in funds such as the insurance companies that Scott had mentioned into that pool as well. The age of buyers might finally be decreasing a little bit. We're not, like Scott hinted at, 80 selling to 70. Maybe we're 70 selling to 55 and 65 as they look into their portion of retirement. Water matters. When we talked about availability to that, we learned from Scott, didn't even know that you could sell runoff water coming out of the mountains. So appreciate him sharing that as well. And then you jump all the way down to what our prediction was for 23. More than likely going to see land stay strong. We might see a stagnant market towards the end of 23 in some portions of the United States. But as long as commodity prices stay high, farm income stays at a positive level, we will still see people investing in farmland. So, Scott, as far as that goes, that was my summary for this moment. What is the best advice that you have ever been given?
Well, I was really hoping your answer would be longer to give me more time to think. But yeah, I tell you, I get advice every day from people, and hopefully you sort it out, and hopefully you're making good decisions and good advice. My grandfather always told me just about every time I would leave him, he would say, it takes years to to build a great reputation, and it'll take seconds to ruin it. And that's something that I always take, and I don't know if you consider that as advice, but it's certainly something that I always have on my mind, that, hey, you're one step away from making a real bad decision that could change your life. And our lives are all about decisions from the time we wake up in the morning to the time we go to bed at night. And so just to always make those good decisions that are hopefully going to be good for you.
That's good. So, Dave, what's your challenge?
I'm going to challenge everybody and help my buddy out here to buy 1 million acres and counting. Sold. Go out and get a copy of Scott's book and open your mind to different perspectives of how different land can change hands. It might make you change your mind about what you want to buy or how you should do it.
I like that. So before we...
Hey, I will add to that, David, that's only available on Amazon.com, because if they're running into the local bookstore, they're all sold out in those.
Gotcha. Amazon.com.
I like that. Scott, for our listeners, how can they contact you if they would like to ask you some more questions?
Hey, my email is scott@hallandhall.com, all spelled out. And my telephone number, 970-631-7009, and they'll get me.
Awesome. If they want to find you, Dave?
I have a land number, if you will.
Nice.
So it's 515-996-LAND. 5263 is land spelled out. You can check out iowalandguy.com, iowalandguy.com. But we are farther than Iowa. I'm licensed in 4 states now. I haven't met up to Scott's perspective at 30, but I have friends in different places that we partner with. So no matter where you're at, I'd love to do business with you.
Awesome. That's great. Listeners, we appreciate you hanging around. Scott, we appreciate you joining us. And listeners, until next time, have a good one.